Because what that did was to allow women of color some space in the reckoning of feminism. So the notion of difference, also identity politics. We recognize, different kinds of feminism. So today, for example, feminists in the United States do not talk about feminism. They talk about feminisms, supposedly to be pluralist. Along with this, however, this notion of difference, which was liberating, you also what is called the cultural or the linguistic turn. I'm simplifying here. While my complaints about, the revolutionary movement here in the 70s and 80s was that they were economic reductionists, now you have a cultural turn. You now have cultural reductionism, which is actually a response to Marxism. So postmodernism is a reaction to Marxism. Along with this is the notion that the nation state is in decline or is dead, and that grand theory, or what is called meta-narratives, is oppressive, is totalizing. What that means is you no longer can have an analysis of globalization, an analysis of social relation of production is out of the question. That's a great irony. That's one supreme irony, it would seem to me, when globalization, by the way, is just a euphemism for imperialism. When globalization means the triumph of capitalism, doesn't it? I mean, it means integration of the entire world, all the nations of the planet, into one global system that is capitalism. It would seem to me that it is at that point that you would need more than ever a theory that would analyze capitalism as accurately as you can. But instead, you have a retreat precisely from that analysis, a withdrawal from a class analysis, a focus on culture. I should also mention that, because we are in being in a neoconservative period means the weakening of progressive thinking, right? Because of the decline or demise of social movements. In the United States, for example, the women's movement was about gone by the early 80s, maybe the 82. And feminists there were very hesitant to acknowledge that. It was not until maybe 2000, 2001, that someone like Barbara Epstein could say, where's the women's movement? That you no longer have a mass women's movement. That in fact, today, feminism is confined to the academy in the United States. And I say this because I want to ask you what the situation is here in our country right now. I can tell you that in the United States, you have no women's movement, you have no mass women's movement. And when you talk about feminism, you mean academic feminism. The staple in academic feminism today is what is called intersectionality. And that means the intersection of gender, race, and class, sometimes referred to as the Holy Trinity. Sometimes it can expanded to sexuality, ageism, fat oppression, I don't know, whatever else you want to include. But it's identity politics, in other words. I think it's important to recognize that identity politics does not take into account systemic analysis. And that's why I think it's very ironic. Because capitalism has really, I mean, you have capitalist triumphalism, right? I mean, Soviet Union's gone, China's gone, become capitalist, social movements, are dead or in decline. And in fact, there are no social movements to speak of. And yet you have no analysis of capitalism. Instead, you just look at identity as intersecting. So it was so interesting because I think last year I was asked to write just an encyclopedia entry on Asian American feminism, and so I had to look at the old writings on Asian American feminism, and I came upon a phrase that I also used myself, but sort of forgot, in response to white feminists, feminists of color talked about their oppression as a triple oppression. And by that, they meant sexism, racism, and capitalism. It's very interesting because I myself had used that, but I just didn't even think of it this way. And I thought, now you have the intersection of gender, race, and class, right? Gender, race, and class seems to recount triple oppression. But yet, if you look more closely, actually, it reverses and undercuts it. Because triple oppression refers to systems. Right? You talk about sexism as a set of social relations, racism and capitalism. To talk about gender, race, and class is not quite the same thing. In fact, the other interesting thing to realize is when you say class in this Holy Trinity, class too has been reduced to just an identity. It's not labor-capital relations by any means, right? All it is what's your lifestyle like? What kinds of things do you consume? What neighborhood do you live in? That's what class means today. It is, in other words, a very conservative view of class that mystifies it. Okay, that's actually the word I want to use. That theory formation today that claims to be progressive actually serves to mystify social relations, which to me, if you're using a materialist view of the world, should be no surprise, because we're living in a neoconservative period. And you would then expect theories that come out, to be reflective of that conservatism, and it certainly does. In short, my concerns of 3 decades ago, when Ida and Lulu and a bunch of other women were getting together to talk about how to articulate social relations of gender, how to articulate feminism, those concerns have been turned upside down. I would have welcomed the emphasis on culture 3 decades ago, because then we were grounded in a materialist analysis. In other words, we could anchor it in the social relations of production, but now that's gone. It's just a floating, it's sort of floating in the stratosphere, unanchored. Another interesting thing I discovered was that about this time last year, I was asked to give a keynote at a Chicano